Hello and welcome to today's virtual Commonwealth Club program. I'm Melissa Kane. I'm the host of Get Out the Bed podcast. I'm a lawyer and political analyst. The club would like to thank the Bernard Osher Foundation for supporting today's Good Lit event. And before we get started, if you have questions for our very special guests, please submit them in the YouTube chat and we will get to them later on in this program. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest today. He is the anchor and chief Washington correspondent at CNN, where he's been a journalist since 2013. His new book, All the Demons Are Here, here we go, is a thriller set in the 1970s, and it highlights a pretty wild decade in American history. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jake Tapper.
Thank you so much. I can feel the applause. I can feel it.
It's a lot of this.
It's like it's a vibe. It's hundreds of people sending me a positive vibe. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, lap it up. This is all the Demons Are Here. Here we go. Is your third book, I believe.
Third novel. Yeah.
Third novel. Have you written other kinds of books?
Yes. I've written before that. I wrote 3 nonfiction books. I did an early quickie bio of Jesse Ventura when he was first elected in 1998. I did a book about the Florida recount in 2001. And then I did the work that I'm probably proudest of as a journalist. It's called The Outpost. It's about Combat Outpost Keating, this real life outpost that was the subject of many, many horrible Taliban attacks. And they made it into that was made into a film starring Scott Eastwood and Caleb Landry Jones and Orlando Bloom in 2000 that came out. 2020.
I apologize then. I didn't realize that you had written The Outpost. I feel like I did read that in one of your bios somewhere. So this is your 6th book.
Yeah, a third novel. Yeah.
Tell us a bit about the plot of this one.
So all 3 books are telling the story of the Martyr family. The first book takes place in 1954. Congressman Charlie Martyr and his zoologist wife, Margaret, thrust into Joe McCarthy's Washington, D.C., and it's about conspiracy theories and shadowy organizations. The second book, Charlie and Margaret go out to Hollywood to investigate the Rat Pack to see if Sinatra is actually mobbed up. And this third book is Charlie and Margaret's. Charlie and Margaret are in the book, but the main characters are Ike and Lucy, their kids. Ike is an AWOL Marine who has become very disenchanted with the military and has left after a disastrous operation in Beirut. He is now on the pit crew for stunt man extraordinaire Evel Knievel in Butte, Montana. And he's very disillusioned with life and trying to figure out what to do next. And he's falling under the spell of this charismatic shoot from the hip leader. And Lucy is his sister, and she is 22. She's an aspiring journalist in Washington, D.C. She wants to be the next Woodward and or Bernstein, and finds herself swept up by this dashing family from England that's just come in to start their own tabloid, the Lyon family, which is based loosely on the Murdoch family. And she becomes their star reporter investigating a serial killer, but she also finds out what it's like when you compromise journalistic ethics and other ethics, and their stories intertwine 3 times with a big climax at the end where their parents are as well. And so that's it. I alternate between Ike's point of view and Lucy's point of view. And it's a really, as you alluded to in the intro, the 1970s are almost their own character. 1977 is a wild year in American history where all sorts of bizarre things happen. And it's almost like the year is just throwing things at Ike and Lucy for them to respond to, but real things that actually happened.
Now, how did you settle on 1977? Because I feel like there should be more things maybe said in the 70s. It really was such a wild decade that maybe we forget because some of us were alive at the time, and it doesn't seem like that. But if you really start looking at the events, it's kind of bananas.
Yeah, I mean, well, the first 2 books were the 50s, then the 60s. So it was natural I was going to do the 70s. I settled on 1977 for a few reasons. One, I decided I was going to do Evel Knievel was going to be a character in the book because a friend of mine is a big Evel Knievel devotee, and he kind of convinced me to learn more about Evel Knievel. And his charm had eluded me as a kid. I was 8 years old in 1977. His charm had eluded me as a kid, but I watched this documentary called Being Evil that was produced by Johnny Knoxville and a bunch of other people. And he really was just a fascinating and quintessentially American character in the sense of his being kind of a salesman and a showman, and almost in a P.T. Barnum, Donald Trump, larger than life kind of able to get lots of attention situation. So, and then once I settled on Evel Knievel, then it was just like, okay, well, when would be a good time to place him? 1974 was when he had his ill-fated Snake River Canyon jump, but that seemed too obvious. And then I found this period of 1977 where all these incredibly wild things happen. Evel Knievel literally jumps sharks like 9 months before Fonz does on Happy Days. Jimmy Carter is inaugurated. It's the New York City blackout happens. Studio 54 opens and disco is supreme. Star Wars comes out. The Son of Sam murders are taking place. The rise of tabloid journalism in New York is a huge story because of Son of Sam. Elvis dies. People are seeing UFOs from coast to coast. People are joining cults all over the United States. And it's also just this time of mistrust in the United States because so many people are so disillusioned with the government and the military because of the Vietnam War and Watergate. So it just seemed a natural time. It also, as the math of my character's age at a normal rate. So it also would just be the time that Ike would be 20 and Lucy would be 22. Because in the first book, Margaret is pregnant with Lucy in 1954. So in any case, it all just made sense. And then I also listened to a podcast by Slate that's called 1 Year, and they just pick 1 year, and and each episode is like one bizarre thing that happened that year or one interesting thing. And I listened to 1977, and that gave me another idea having to do with Laetrile, which was this kind of quackery cancer cure that the nation was obsessed with in 1977. And it didn't cure cancer, but all these people were convinced that it would. And there was this, anyway, I don't want to get too much into the plot of the book, but that also became something that was interesting. So it just ended up being this wild year. And my memory, Melissa, you're obviously much younger than me. But my memory is of 1977. All I remember really was Elvis dying and disco and gas lines. So diving into this era and learning more about it was really interesting for me because there was all this stuff going on that I didn't know about or my parents hid from me, like the Son of Sam murders. So it was really fun. I mean, that was a really bizarre era. The 70s doesn't get its due. People think of it as a lame decade, and I get why, but really it was wild. It was a much wilder decade than the 60s.
Well, I did grow up in a little town in Georgia, and I do remember I never saw Evel Knievel jump anything. I think that was a little before my time, but I do remember him being part of the zeitgeist. And I remember riding my bike and trying to jump over things and invoking Evel Knievel. He was sort of this, this cultural presence, even though I don't think I ever saw him actually jump anything sort of live. And so I hadn't heard the name in forever. And then when I was reading about this book, I thought, oh, wow, that's amazing. And so I'm reading through, and it sounds like this sort of character that I remember. But then we get to this part. I just want to read a little paragraph here. And remember, Ike is part of Evel Knievel's sort of
pit crew. Yeah, he works for Evel Knievel, and he sees him for who he is, but he also admires him.
Right, exactly. And he says, I come to see Knievel as primarily a performer. He held up a mirror to the country, revealing our national need for spectacle, the brutality of powerful men, and the sycophancy of their followers. He was utterly shameless, tethered to neither decorum nor facts. And there was something refreshing about that, about his admissions of infidelity and his petty grievances. The country was waking up from a hangover from years of being lied to by presidents and generals, but I couldn't tell if that realization was propelling us into a world of truth or a world where truth had no value. And at this point, I realized Evel Knievel is Donald Trump.
Well, ish. Yeah. I mean, not directly. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump doesn't do stunts on a motorcycle, but they would be cool. they do that. No, that would be something. But that they do share qualities, and not. I don't even mean them in a negative way necessarily. Like they do share qualities, and it's funny, So for the book, I had to write as Ike and I had to write as Lucy. And both of them were challenging in their own ways because Ike is Lucy, I'm not a 22-year-old woman. So like I had to figure out, and I had a really good editor named Christina who helped me write more credibly as Lucy. But for Ike, it was more challenging because I don't know anything about motorcycles. My dad is a pediatrician. My mom is a nurse. It was, it was put into my brain very early on, do not ever ride a motorcycle. They called them donor cycles is what they called them. Yeah, it's rough. But that's apparently what a lot of doctors and nurses call motorcycles, donor cycles. So I had to credibly write about motorcycles because Ike is an expert motorcyclist and he works for Evel Knievel, who is a motorcycle stuntman. And there are number of scenes in the book where motorcycles are important to the plot. There's a scene abroad. There's a scene in Chicago. There's a scene at the end of the book. There's just a bunch. So what to do? Because I don't know anything about motorcycles and I'm not about at age 54 to become an expert on motorcycles. Not with my wife. That would not. She has a tough enough time with me having a convertible. So I found this guy named Mark Gardner, who is a motorcycle enthusiast and expert and also a writer, and he writes about motorcycles. So I hired him. I just found him online and reached out to him online and hired him to edit the sections of the book about motorcycles so that it would seem credible, A, if you know anything about motorcycles, but B, even if you don't, that you would believe that the terms that this character is using, I don't know what that means, but he obviously does.
I'm in the B category. I can tell you it totally worked.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I don't know about you, Melissa, but you're obviously an expert on any number of things. And when you watch a TV show or a movie in which the people writing the TV show or movie obviously do not know what they're talking about, it really ruins the movie or the TV show for me. As somebody just about journalism or politics.
I was going to say, you ever see a show about a newsroom? Oh boy.
Yeah, no, it really, it's like that wouldn't happen, or that's naive, or that's silly, or yeah. I mean, I remember in The American President, I think they have President Shepard, played by Michael Douglas, introduce legislation. White House Bill number 342. White Houses don't introduce legislation. That's not how it works. Anyway, it takes me out of it. And here I am 25 years later, still remembering how much that annoyed me. I didn't want that to happen for anybody. So I hired Mark. He did his work. And then after it was all over, he said, by the way, I thought you'd find this interesting. And he sent me an essay that he had written a couple years ago that I had not seen, in which he directly compares Evel Knievel and Donald Trump. And so my only point is it's just there. I mean, it makes sense. They have DNA in common. I mean, it just is. You can love both guys or not, but there are similarities. Donald Trump has strengths and weaknesses that Evel Knievel shared, and it's just a fact.
Well, in the book too, you don't demonize his followers, and he does develop this. I don't want to give too much away, but he does develop a following, and you do make an effort to try to connect with some of them.
Yeah, no, and that was also one of the things I wanted to do. I didn't want either the Rupert Murdoch-esque character for whom Lucy works at the tabloid, or Evel Knievel, or his followers to be caricatures. I wanted them to be real people with real points of view. Actually, some of the followers of Evel Knievel in the book are the most sympathetic characters in the book. This band of Vietnam veterans who are living in the woods of somewhere in the area of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. And those to me are the most sympathetic characters in the book, including Ike and Lucy. And they are following Evel Knievel on his crusade, and because they think he's going to help them, he's going to help solve their problems, which is, I think one of the things that is important when people think about politics and think about Donald Trump and think about Donald Trump supporters is a lot of them really believe in him, and a lot of them have quite legitimate grievances. And it's not fair to lump 72 million people together as one, as one person or one group that has the exact same mindset. It's reductive and not accurate. And so I wanted to get into the idea. Yeah, I mean, I used the story of Evel Knievel to have fun, but then also just to like kind of look at leaders and followers and how does that work. But also, like, I didn't want it to be negative. I wanted to just to be believable.
Did you consult with any veterans when you wrote that part? Because my dad was a Vietnam vet, and that whole passage, there's a whole section on where I guess, talking to Vietnam veterans about their grievances, and it sounded very familiar to me. It seemed very real, a lot of very similar things, and that feeling of abandonment that he felt. Now he passed away before Trump ran for president, so I don't know who he would have supported, but did you reach out to folks? Do you know people who are in these groups that you are able to talk through their issues?
So I just, ever since becoming a campaign trail reporter and covering John McCain in 1999, 2000, have been acutely aware of the legitimate grievances of Vietnam veterans. And so it was just something I've been aware of for a long time. I cover veterans a lot today anyway, Afghan and Iraq veterans. So that was kind of something I was aware of. I did read a lot about Agent Orange, about Vietnam veterans, the experience of Vietnam veterans, learned a lot. The one veteran I consulted was a Marine, because there's a scene that takes place in Lebanon. It takes place in Beirut, Lebanon. It's Ike's mission, because you hear early on that he went AWOL because something went terribly wrong, and eventually you find out what it is. And I did consult a former Marine because I wanted to know what kind of battle song might soldiers be thinking to themselves as they run and they're just trying to psych themselves up. And I wanted to use a Marine-esque song that would be sung chanted in 1977. But that was the only thing I did.
Was why the Marines of all the branches? Were you thinking of? I was thinking of Robert Mueller, or anyone in particular who came from maybe a wealthy family but joined the Marines.
Well, so Charlie is an Army veteran. That's the dad, and he was he came into France right after D-Day. So I wanted to be service, but I didn't want it to be Army. I didn't want Ike to be following directly into his dad's footsteps, and then mainly it was because I wanted Ike to have a situation abroad. And the 70s and the early 80s, the Marines were in Lebanon. And so it made sense to have him be a Marine for both those reasons. A, to kind of like be different than his dad. They're the tough guys. And also because it needed to be like a credible U.S. military action, even though the one that's in the book is I made up. It's not unbelievable that the Marines would be in Lebanon doing something like that, because they were in and out of Lebanon throughout the 70s. And then obviously in the early 80s, they were there. And then there were all these horrible attacks on the Marines during the early Reagan years.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Oh, no, but I also want to talk about Lucy. And you did mention that you consulted with a woman journalist
so Christina Kovac is a great author and editor, and she was my editor. I hired her to be my first set of eyes. In addition to being a great editor, she's also a woman and helped me help me write Lucy more credibly. There are a couple turns of phrase in there and a couple thoughts that Lucy has that would never have occurred to me. At one point, Lucy talks about having cute boots, which is not a phrase that ever would have rolled off my tongue. Cute boots, but it seemed. But so she helped me again. I had to write as a believable 22-year-old woman. And it's not that different. I mean, you're not a different species, but you are different than me, a 54-year-old man. So she helped with that. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that Lucy talks about that I wrote for a newspaper here for about 8 years. And one of the things that drove me completely insane was what they would do with the headlines and how they would edit my pieces. And it was so frustrating. And it just, all the comments were about that. It was never about like the thing I wrote. And so you do really get into this issue. Lucy kind of runs into this repeatedly in the story. And first, I just want to thank you for highlighting the fact that writers do not write their headlines and they don't always get the final edit either. And so I just feel like the world should know this. But have you been a print journalist or sort of a written word journalist in a sense, and had this happen to you, had editorial either issues or headline issues that frustrated you? Was that part of why you wanted to work that in?
So I started out as a print journalist early in my career. I started at Washington City Paper. I was a freelance journalist, and then I was Washington City Paper, and then I was at Salon.com, which is based where you are. And but no, I never really had that problem, to be honest. I've been lucky enough to have editors that made my work better, generally speaking. Like I didn't have that problem, but I know enough about journalism and the role that editors play and how annoying it can be to have a misleading headline to know that it happens. And the dynamic that Lucy experiences is she wants to be the next Woodward or Bernstein, but she's hired by this tabloid, and they want to take her prose and make it tabloidy. They want to lean into stories and pretend they know more than they do and use the most incendiary headlines and suggest things are true that aren't necessarily true. And it wasn't hard to imagine what that was like, having been on the other side of it, of having good editors. I could see, like, if it's had bad editors, I could see that. I mean, I've been edited now for I don't even know, 25, 30 years, whatever it is. And like most of the experiences have been great, but sometimes people want to spice things up and everything like that. So I'm glad that you related to that. Maggie Haberman, who now writes for the New York Times, but earlier in her career wrote for the New York Post and the New York Daily News. And she asked me if I had been, and this is like the highest praise I could get, if I had, like, how I knew about this, like, had I consulted with people who had worked for tabloids before and this and that? And no, I just made it up, but it's like really not that difficult to imagine how it happens. You have a story saying neighbors saw, the dog, chase the ball. And next thing you know, it's on the front, it's on the front page on the wood of the tabloid, like mad dog invades city, or, it's not difficult to see how that happens. And look, I mean, I see tabloids and I see Fox. I know how it works. Like they goose the stuff and they want eyeballs. And then I did read, and this had less to do with coming up with the inner workings of a tabloid, but I did read some biographies of Rupert Murdoch and watch a documentary about Rupert Murdoch. And I know his philosophies of news consumers. And I actually gave some of his beliefs directly to Max Lyon, the Rupert Murdoch character in the book. And one of them is that news consumer behaviors are based on fear and rage. And that's it, fear and rage. And so now that you have that in your brain, next time you pick up any Murdoch publication or turn on Fox, think, what are they trying to appeal here? And it's either fear or rage, almost always.
Well, and there is so much about journalism in this book, because you have Lucy, who is a journalist and sort of navigating that area. And then you have Ike, who is at least part of a group that's being covered by journalists. Is there a character in the book that's basically you, or that one of the, because there's so many different voices that are all sort of opining on journalism and sort of where it is and how to approach it. Is there anyone who's a proxy for you in this book?
I mean, Lucy is probably closest to me of all the martyrs, Charlie, Margaret, Ike, and Lucy, just because she is in the book a young idealistic reporter who wants to be the next Woodward and Bernstein. She's ambitious, but she also wants to do good. But then I was never in a situation like her. I never worked for a tabloid. I never worked for a Murdoch-esque character. I did imbue in her, I did give her some of my more annoying traits, like Lucy's the person who corrects the misuse of ironic. If you're using the word ironic incorrectly, if you're misunderstanding Robert Frost or you're misunderstanding Shakespeare, she will explain to you how you are misunderstanding. Those are annoying things that I do. And since I do them and they're annoying, and I also think they're funny, I gave them to her just because I also her chapters all have footnotes also, just because that's the kind of thing I would do. So we'll have Lucy do it too.
Well, I wasn't sure if you were making these corrections on sort of what does the Robert Frost poem mean as sort of a public service announcement, just sort of also world, here's what ironic means, sort of, let me clarify. These are
annoying things that I do in real life. And I thought Lucy would be a perfect character to carry the torch. I mean, she is also a smarty pants journalist. And so, why not have her do it too? I didn't like, there's one of these things I learned from a friend of mine who's a lawyer. It's one of the first things she says to her new boss, Max Lyon, is she corrects him when he does the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers, which is a famous Shakespeare line. But my lawyer friend said, that is a sign that the actual quote is, let's kill all the lawyers, because that person wants to destroy civilization and knows that lawyers are the last line of defense between civilization and chaos. And so everybody uses it to trash lawyers, but it actually originally means something very positive for lawyers. So I learned that from a smarty pants lawyer friend of mine, but I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll have Lucy say that. As
a lawyer, we appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Right. Discussions at the next meeting. We appreciate the defense. Now, is this true? Now, I think I read this, but correct me if I'm wrong. There is a character whose race we don't find out about until the end,
right,
of the book. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I don't want to spoil it, but there's somebody who's is believed to be of one race, and then you find out later she's of another race. It's not really
giving it too much away, but
it's not a huge plot point, but it has something to do with that character. But that is correct.
And I assume that was a purposeful decision, but just was curious about why it's just not, it seems like kids today, it seems like, like that's often a very central part of how people imagine certain characters and, well, maybe all characters. And so I was just curious about your decision to sort of say, it's going to matter when it matters.
It just had more to do with the deceit. It has just more to do with the deceit of her character. More than anything. But I did, when you have a book written these days, especially fiction, they have publishers often have sensitivity readers go over things to make sure, I think they have like a checklist of like 50 things to make sure that you're not doing 50 1,000 stereotypes you're not doing, et cetera, et cetera. I had a friend of mine who is an editor and a writer and of the race that we're talking about, give the book a read just on my own to give it an extra check. So we're talking so vaguely. I don't want any.
No, I'm sorry. We'll move on.
Yeah.
So in the book, and this is, it's funny because my sense of like who was your voice kind of changes throughout, but it seems like there is this admiration for, at least Ike certainly has admiration for his father, the senator. Yeah. At one point he says, the Venn diagram of Dad's real self and Dad's image was pretty much a circle. Most of the politicians, the polls in this town were so phony, they would summon your Holden Caulfield, toot sweet. And it made me think of Fox News and the lawsuit, the text messages we learned about where people were texting literally the opposite of what they were saying. Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you, how significant do you think uncovering all of that was? And is this your ideal of what people should be, sort of saying and doing things that are true to themselves?
Yeah, so Charlie Martyr is the hero congressman of the first two books. In this third book, he's more of a secondary character. He's a senator now, but he's a character that I have created. So it's weird to say it, but I do. He is. I admire him. I admire the kind of politician he is. He is kind of my vision of a very flawed but decent person trying to make good, trying to do good in public service, which is not always interesting. Not always easy. The first book, The Hellfire Club, is a lot about people who come to Washington, D.C., and I've seen this a million times, with the intention of doing good. And in the service of doing good, they start making compromises. And then they make another compromise, and then they make another compromise. And before you know it, all they're focused on is their compromises and not the good that they were trying to do. And that's kind of part of what the Hellfire Club is about. But I wanted Charlie, I in my mind where these people reside, I admire Charlie. I think he's a good person, and again, flawed and drinks too much and that sort of thing, but a decent man, a family man. He cares about his children. He cares about his country. He does the right thing. He's a moderate Republican in a party that is turning away from his views. He's the only Republican he's one of only two House Republicans that vote to impeach Nixon on the Judiciary Committee, et cetera, et cetera. So it made sense to me that he would just be an honest kind of guy, because I always, just like from the very beginning, admired the character. The tension between Ike and his dad has to do with more his dad being an establishment figure and Ike just not knowing what to believe anymore in the world, because he's being raised amidst Vietnam and Nixon. He's seeing his dad not treated particularly well by the Republican Party. He has an episode in high school that I write about where he feels betrayed by one of his friends. Then he has this episode in Vietnam, in Beirut, and Ike. There's parts of me and Ike too. Like my darkest days are his views of the world and the government, and how you can't trust anyone, and how politicians lie and governments lie for any reason. I'm not quite that cynical, but on a dark day, I might have a little bit of Ike in me. But I wanted Ike to be a stand-in for the United States and for the public in terms of like, boy, I just don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know who to trust anymore. I don't know if any of these institutions like stand for anything anymore. And he's only 20, so it's perfectly age appropriate. But I wanted that to be his issue. Although I also wanted him to recognize that his dad was a decent man, and as estranged as he was from his father, and as difficult as their communication was, I wanted there to be an overall respect that he had for his dad, and his dad's how genuine his dad was.
Well, and the other thing that he attributes to his dad is he says one thing that his dad would say is that being president necessitates a moral compass that campaigns tend to demagnetize. And that does tend to go to what you were saying earlier about watching people start out one way and end up a very different way. I mean, we're here in the Bay Area. A number of our local politicians go on to sort of very high levels of government, both in the state and elsewhere. And, it's interesting to watch them since they were very, sort of, a lower level public office, and then sort of change over time because of armies of consultants, and, they get focus grouped to death. And then there are the other sort of parts of the machine that sort of change them into.
I've interviewed many of the people you're talking about, whether it's the vice president or your governor or Congresswoman Barbara Lee. I think Congresswoman Barbara Lee has stayed pretty true to who she's always been, whether you like that or not. So yeah, no, I definitely see that. I definitely understand what you're saying. I mean, I think that the line you just read about the demagnetizing of moral compasses, I do think it's true to a degree. Like the American people say they want a sincere, principled politician, but then to get through the primary, process for Democrats or Republicans. You're constantly being pushed by activist groups and by the media and by everyone, pollsters and consultants, to change your point of view on any number of topics. And I do think it is a real issue. Now, I think President Obama said that presidential campaigns are an MRI for the soul. And I guess he meant that in the sense that he thought that he had survived that test pretty well. But while not disagreeing with the idea of what he's saying, I mean, I remember some pretty brazen things that he said and did when he was running for office that were not what he actually thought, whether it was voting against funding for the troops in Iraq, which both Hillary and Clinton and he did, even though they didn't want to, whether it was pretending that they were going to, renegotiate NAFTA right before the Ohio primary, which neither of them believed. I mean, you see it, and it's just, it makes you cynical about the process, if not the people in the process.
And that's, something, it sounds like, at least one of your characters sort of knows very clearly and intimately from the inside, and the son is certainly trying to grapple with. One of the things that struck me about the book is that it's very almost cinematic. I could sort of see a screenplay in here, because it's very there's a lot of action and it sort of moves really well. Are you planning to do that? Is that in the works? And if so, let's talk about casting.
Well, you'd be a good Lucy. You're not 22, but you could pass for it. You could pass for it. So the reason it's cinematic is just because, honestly, I know when I'm writing thrillers that I'm not only competing with other authors, I'm competing with your phone, and I'm competing with Netflix, and I'm competing with your kids, and I'm competing with everybody in your life that's trying to get your attention. And so I want you to keep coming back and turning the pages, and that's why it might read that way. In terms of bringing it to the big screen, the second book, The Devil May Dance, which is Charlie and Margaret investigating Sinatra. We were right before the writer's strike, working with a major showrunner who has a deal with a streamer. Christian Slater is interested in playing Charlie, investigating Sinatra, and in 1962, Hollywood. And that's just on hold until the writer's strike is over. But as soon as it's over, we're going to go back, and that's the plan.
Interesting. I was thinking for Lucy, not me. Wasn't it Kiernan Shipka? She played Sally Draper in Mad Men.
Oh yeah, she's great.
She played the daughter in The Plumbers, which I know you watched.
Yeah,
you don't have to ask. And I thought she was so great. And she's
great and smart. She conveys intelligence really, and I could see her doing intelligence and ambition, both. Yeah, she'd be really good. And she's probably about 22 right now, I would say.
She is. I looked her up, and I'm getting nothing in exchange for telling you this. But if her agent wants to call me, that would be great. But I was just trying to think through who would play these various folks. The title of your book is, in the book you say it's from a Led Zeppelin song, but that is not true, right?
It's not true. No, I write songs now because publishers will only let you quote one line from a song. Which I hate so much because it's just so difficult if you're trying to come up with an atmospheric scene, especially one in the past, to only have one line from a song. And I learned this when I was writing The Outpost. There's a scene where they're all in a convoy of Humvees, and they're driving, in Afghanistan, and they were literally listening to AC/DC, Shook Me All Night Long, and I had a whole thing, and the publisher made me take it out because I could be sued for copyright theft. And I said, but it really happened. They were really listening to the song. It didn't matter. So I learned. So again, in the first novel, in the Hellfire Club, I'd have 2 or 3 lines, and they would take them out. You can only use one line. I would have a Sinatra song setting the stage in 1954. So then the second book, The Devil May Dance, it's all about Sinatra. And the idea that I could only have one line from a Sinatra song in a book that is about Sinatra seemed crazy. So I wrote this entire song called The Devil May Dance. I mean, not the music, but just the lyrics. And it takes one of the big climactic scenes in the book. Sinatra is singing this fictitious song at the 1962 Oscars. And the publisher's lawyer calls me before, when they're reviewing the manuscript, and they say, Tapper, we've told you this before. You can't quote these songs past a line. And here you have an entire song. In fact, you have like three songs. I said, I wrote them all. They're all invented. None of them are real. The Devil May Dance. What a compliment. I know. The Devil May Dance.
You must have been like, huh.
Yeah. Well, I find the lyrics the easy part. The tune would probably be more difficult. But in any case, so then to a much lesser degree, All the Demons Are Here is a Led Zeppelin song at the beginning, but it's also based on a famous Shakespeare quote from The Tempest. All the devils are here. At one point at the beginning of The Tempest, there's this huge, horrible storm, not unlike the storm at the very end of my book, where one of the characters says, hell is empty and all the devils are here, meaning just like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Everything's awful. And so I changed all the devils are here to all the demons are here, because I'd already had the word devil in the title of the second book. But that's where it comes from. But yeah, I also made up the Led Zeppelin song, which, it seemed believable, like the lyrics to the song, right?
I thought it was. I only know that it's from Shakespeare because I listened to a different interview that you had done, and you had talked about it. But I was as shocked as anyone. I just assumed, sure.
But even in the book, Robert Plant's version of All the Demons Are Here, he's singing. It's based on the Shakespeare. It's based on The Tempest. So even then, I do have an acknowledgments in the back of the book where I not only thank people and give source material if I've used a magazine article or a book or anything like that, but where I explain things that are real and what's not real. I will say All the Demons Are Here is not a real song. Don't go look for it on iTunes. It's not there. It's not real. It could be a good one. Is Robert Plant still alive? I mean, like maybe we could get him.
And he could pay you for the lyrics instead of the other way around.
It's fine. They don't have to pay me.
You comp that?
Yeah, I'll comp it.
So I want to get some audience questions here
Great.
from YouTube. We've got this person writes, you've written nonfiction now and thrillers. Is there any other genre of book you would like to try writing?
Yes, there are two other things I would like to try writing. One is I'd like to try writing a screenplay. I went to film school after college, so I know how to write a screenplay, but I haven't really tried since I was in my 20s. And now I actually, know a teeny bit more about life. That's something I would like to try. And I would like to try, I was an art minor in college, and I used to be a cartoonist. I would like to try at some point in the next, I'm giving myself 20 years. So it's sometime before 2043, I'd like to do a graphic novel of some sort. So those are the two things. I should say, by the way, I have lots of friends and relatives in San Francisco. I don't know if any of them are listening, but if my brother or my sister-in-law or my sister-in-law's parents are watching, hi, and I love you. And anyone else in my family, hello.
All right, great. I'm sure they are. I have a question here. What is the best piece of professional advice that you have received, and who is it from?
I'll give you a few because I've gotten a few. Ted Koppel once said to me, you can tell your bosses no. That was a revolutionary thought to me at one point. You can tell your bosses no. Charlie Gibson told me one time to stop emailing so much. Like, this was in the days of like 2008, 2009, where I feel like people were doing all staff emails a lot more frequently than they are today. But back then, like, cool it on the emails. And then one time I was doing a podcast interview with Alan Alda and on his podcast this a few years ago. And he said something to me that was so wise. He was talking about emailing, and he was talking about how he always tries to figure out what state of mind the other person is in before he sends the email, which again was revolutionary to me because to me, email is just like, this is what I need, da, 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 and like, I'm sorry, I'm really busy, da, 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 da. And like, I definitely do not take into account, and I still do this, not just email, but text. Mm-hmm. And so for instance, if I'm in a script file, if I'm like working on the show, I'm in all caps. And an email comes and I bang out an email. It's in all caps because I have not all capsed it. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'm in script file. Like, who cares? But like the other person thinks I'm yelling at them. So these are three things. I don't always take the advice, but they are three great pieces of advice, having nothing to do with how well I've taken any of it.
All right. We've got here, if you had the opportunity to go back and interview someone from the 1970s, who would it be and what would you ask them?
I think you'd probably have to do the Ayatollah Khomeini, right? I mean, he was just this horrible person that set American foreign policy and took, upended it and changed a presidential election and, took hostages. And I mean, horrible. I don't think that I admire this person, but like, if I'm a journalist, I mean, I think interviewing the Ayatollah would be someone. I'd love to have interviewed Richard Nixon. Those Frost Nixon interviews were pretty amazing. So that's two. I'll give you those two.
Excellent.
Also, you'd want to do Caitlyn Jenner at the 1976 Olympics. If I could go back in time and say, you're not going to believe this, or maybe you will believe this. I mean, I don't know, but I'm not trying to dead name, but like Bruce Jenner, when I was, 7, was the biggest athlete in the world. So anyway,
those are all.
I mean, wouldn't you love to know, like, Caitlyn Jenner in 1976? Like, I was just in 2023. Like, this is what's going to happen. Like, are you like, what are you feeling? I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know if in that moment of just extraordinary,
of representing of. I don't want this to sound insensitive, and I hope it doesn't, but like, of representing masculinity in 1976 while inside feeling entirely different. I just think it would be fascinating. As a journalist, I just think it's interesting. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think even today it would be interesting to learn more about that. And we also have another question about debates, and this does sort of dovetail to something recent with the Donald Trump town hall. But this person also asked about, you've moderated a Republican primary debate in 2015 and presidential debate in 2016. You talk about your preparation process and if there's anything that should be changed in the debate format. And what I want to ask too is, because I've moderated a lot of debates as well, and the audience, I'm not sure we should have an audience anymore. It's gotten so once people are in the room, there's almost nothing you can do. Even if you've got like armed guards, there's like nothing you can do. And so I think that's my first question is, given sort of what we're seeing with people being more engaged, let's say, should we continue to have audiences when we're doing these things?
So so I have to say, it's interesting that you raise that, because I have to say, I co-moderated with Dana Bash and another journalist a debate in, I believe it was March 2020. So COVID had hit and we had no audience, and it was just Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. And it was more civil. It was more pleasant. It was more focused on them. I understand why media organizations, civic organizations like audiences. You want people to feel engaged. It definitely provides a certain electricity. But I get the point. The thing is, none of this is ever up to me or you, right? Exactly. We just show up and do what we're told. So, but I will say, like, I get the argument you're making.
Is there anything that you think should be changed or refreshed in the debate format so that voters can be more informed? And, if you go back and listen to it, I'm sure you have, because you're a big nerd like me, you've listened to the Nixon Kennedy debates. And,
yeah.
These answers, they get 5 minutes
Long.
to answer a question, not 30
Yeah.
seconds. And I don't know, do we need to go back to that, or is there any way we can tweak this to make it better?
Well, first of all, 2 people is great. I mean, having moderated an 11-person Republican presidential primary debate in 2015, that was brutal. And I really don't know, like, nobody wants to be the bad guy, and nobody wants to say the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee does not want to say, sorry, we're just doing the top 4 candidates, because they'll just make so many enemies of, candidates 5, 6, 7, and 8 and their supporters. But it's really much more interesting and substantive and edifying to have 4, maybe 5 candidates, no more than that. I think audiences can be pluses or minuses. I don't know. It's just, it's very difficult to moderate a debate. It's more angst and agita than joy, in terms of moderating them. It's a real challenge. I still get nervous about interviews, like big interviews. Like I still have problems sleeping and stuff before interviews, because it's really difficult. I mean, I get it's not like staging the Bin Laden raid. It's not like working in a coal mine. I'm not saying poor me, but it's not my favorite thing. It's really difficult and really challenging, and the risk is high and the reward is low.
I totally agree. It seems like there's almost no upside. Like there's only a way to look bad. There's almost no way to come out looking good. And here's something, and I want to follow up because this really dovetails into your recent interview with Ron DeSantis, where there will always be people who want you to push back more.
Yeah.
And part because you're saying, look, I'm not the person debating the candidate.
Right.
I'm just here to elicit information, or I'm here to do this interview to elicit information. I'm going to push back a little, but it's hard to know exactly how much to engage and how much to just sort of let them say the things that they think so that people can judge. I mean, how do you draw that line? Well,
I mean, first of all, as you say, no one's ever going to be happy. But that said, that doesn't mean you throw in the towel. First of all, let me, or second of all, I'm never satisfied with my work. I never leave an interview or a debate and think like, nice work, good job, kid. Like I never think that. I spend the next 2 or 3 days beating the crap out of myself for what I did wrong or what I could have done better. And also just, it is really difficult because these things are not about my opinions. If I want my opinion, first of all, that's not the kind of journalism I do. I'm not an opinion journalist. Second of all, yes, you want to push back, but you also have to decide when you're going to push back over what issue, and is it worth sacrificing X, Y, Z? So just an example might be, Ron DeSantis shared his opinions on a whole number of things, ranging from in his view, the woke military to how he hopes that the special counsel does not indict Donald Trump because it would be bad for the country, to this issue, that issue, this issue, that issue. Just because I let him speak his mind, he's the candidate, not me, doesn't mean I agree with anything he's saying, or doesn't mean I disagree with anything he's saying. It's about him. It's about his opinions. I can push back on this, that. You could do an entire interview, and I only had 15 minutes, where we're just talking about one subject, Donald Trump, let's say, or the woke military, or trans rights, or abortion, or anything. You could do 15 minutes is nothing. If I push back on this, I am also I know I have a question about the environment that I want to ask about that is really important I don't know, Melissa, if you have any kids or anything, but like you look like you're too young to have kids, but I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, and they're never going to forgive my generation for climate change. Like I know that now. So like I am purposefully trying to cover and ask questions about climate change as much as I can, just like I'll be long gone before this stuff really like starts to destroy civilization. But like, I just want the record. I was pushing on this stuff. If I push on this thing because you disagree, because Ron DeSantis used a term you don't like, or he said something, he gave an opinion you don't like, I'm not going to get to ask my climate change question. So like all of these competing considerations are in my brain, and I'm never going to get it perfect, ever.
Well, and I think it's hard because some people at home just want, they're going to say, be quiet and let this person talk. And then some people are going to say, no, you got to get in there. And, there is no,
some people want, they're not going to be
abortion,
they're not going to be happy unless I literally jump on stage and beat the person to a bloody pulp. Like that is true. Or they want me to debate the person. And that's not the kind of journalism I do. Like I'm not, and I'm not, this is not a criticism of her. I'm not Rachel Maddow. I'm not Sean Hannity. These are people with clear ideological points of view. And I'm not comparing Hannity and Maddow. Let me make that also quite clear. I'm Rachel's journal. Like Rachel is a broadcaster. Her podcasts are unbelievable. Like I'm not comparing the two, but they both are coming from a place of ideology. I'm trying to not do that. I'm trying to come to this from a place of journalism and news. And so, yeah, I'm never going to make everybody happy. It's just never going to happen.
Is there an interview that you would like to do, but you haven't been able to do yet? I mean, is there an ungettable get for Jake Tapper out there? Somebody you want to interview, but they haven't come on the show.
I would love to interview Putin.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to interview Putin. I would love to interview the Pope, but I don't want a 15-minute interview with either of them. I want like a 2-hour taped interview that we can highly produce and I can edit. But yeah, Putin and the Pope are the two that I would really, really, really like to do. Right
be
now.
A series: Jake Tapper, Putin, and the Pope. I feel
not at the same time, Melissa. Although that's interesting. That's an interesting concept. What if that was the only way to get them? Putin will do it, but only with the Pope. All right. Fine.
And the Pope was like, only if Putin is there.
Yeah, it's okay. Fine. I mean, it's kind of weird. It's kind of a weird way to do it, but if it's the only way to get you guys, okay.
I mean, you could do some pub trivia. I mean, it could be a whole thing.
Yeah.
You've had some pretty harsh words in the past about RFK Jr. And there has been recently some recording that came out of some comments that he made at a dinner. Do you feel sort of, I don't want to say vindicated, but you sort of have had your hackles up about him for a while,
for a long time.
Now things are coming out that are maybe not casting him in the best light. Are you sort of seeing that as a bit of, again, I'm going to use the word vindication, but I hope there's a less strong word.
It's not a question of vindication. It's just a question of, look, first of all, I like a lot of people in that family. I mean, I really like former Congressman Joe Kennedy III. I've met Caroline. I've met Kathleen. I've met Carrie. Like, there's obviously some bad strains in that family, but like generally speaking, the Kennedys I've met have been good, decent people trying to use their platform for good. And he just lies about childhood vaccines. And like I had a professional dealing with him back in 2005 when he first embraced these false claims about childhood vaccines. And I've just seen him lie about me and more importantly, lie about these vaccines for, almost 2 decades now. And it's tragic. If anybody wants to see what I'm talking about, just Google Robert Kennedy Jr., Samoa, and measles. and you'll see what I'm talking about. But like, it causes real harm. People believe him because he looks like his dad and he's from this family. And, you know, I'm an admirer of the family in general, but I feel I'm actually kind of surprised it took him this long to get to the anti-Semitic part of this movie, because it was like inevitable. Once you start going down any rabbit hole involving this many insane conspiracy theories, you're going to land on anti-Semitism sooner or later. Like, that's just all of these tunnels, all these rabbit holes lead to anti-Semitism.
Would you have him on CNN? Like, if he called
No.
and wanted to do an interview with you?
No, and other anchors and other people at CNN can decide for themselves. I'm just talking about me. I know he says things that are not true, and every interview I've seen him give this year, whether to Joe Rogan or whomever, he just says things that are wildly inaccurate, whether it's about the Ukrainians or about vaccines or even things he has said. Like, I mean, we all saw that video that the New York Post got about him suggesting that, you know, perhaps COVID was a weaponized virus that was designed to not touch Ashkenazi Jews or Asians. And when we all saw him say it on the video, it's not a deep fake. And then he denied he had said it. I mean, it's just, anyway, he is who he is, and it's a shame. And I know his family's embarrassed about him, and that's all there is to say, really.
He does seem to be growing in popularity. I mean,
I don't think people, it may, if he is, that's the response of the people. The last poll I saw of him showed him with 14% support among Democrats. So that's not nothing, but it's lower than 19%. But that was a poll today, a Q poll, a Quinnipiac poll among Democrats nationwide. So yeah, I mean, look,
and that's a lot. I mean, it's
more than Marianne Williamson, and it definitely speaks to a certain weakness Joe Biden has in the primary. And look, there's part of him that I get it. He's charismatic. He's good looking. He's a Kennedy. He is talking about mistrust of corporations, which I certainly sympathize with, and you know, I would be all ears. But I just happen to know things he says about childhood vaccines are wildly false and dangerous if parents believe them.
We have time for just a couple more questions. One is, I wanted to ask you about Chris Christie, because I know when this came up on the podcast that I host, I said, oh, well, you know, he had his moment. And I remember like Tampa in 2012, and I was covering it. And it seemed like this was Chris Christie's moment. And he gave a speech in support of Mitt Romney, and he was a good soldier. But I just thought, oh, well, then, you know, that's that. So when his name came back up for 2024, I thought, well, you know, that ship has sailed. But he actually does seem to be sort of elbowing his way in there. What do you make of his sort of, I think it's a bit of a resurgence, but I don't know if you think he ever went away.
Well, I mean, he is, a lot of people, once Trump, well, he was the first one to drop out and immediately endorse Trump. And a lot of people were bummed out in 2016 after he came in, I think, 5th in New Hampshire. And I think he's an interesting person. He really tethered himself closely to Trump, and now he is Trump's chief critic among the Republican presidential candidates. I think he's an interesting person. I think that I think it's a long shot for somebody who's so critical of Trump to run for president, because the Republican base really does still love and admire Trump so much. But it is interesting having somebody like him on the stage saying what he's saying. And, you know, as a journalist, it's good to have somebody in there who's different than the others. I mean, like when Rand Paul ran for president in 2012, 2016, I thought he was, I thought he was an interesting voice. He was different. He said things that were different. I told that to him when he dropped out. I said, you know, I'm sorry you're dropping out. You provide a different perspective on foreign policy and things like that. It's not to say I agree with it, but it's just, different. And so I think he's an interesting character. I don't know that the brash Yankee Republican lane isn't already filled by Donald Trump, but I certainly think he's also willing to talk to the press much more than most of the other Republicans. So for that reason alone, I'm selfishly happy.
All right, we have time for one more question, and I just want to give you one from the audience here. And I'm sort of piggybacking on the appearance that you had on the Kara Swisher podcast, where she said, your book seems a little lacking in hope. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to, and maybe it's just because of the characters, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about what you are hopeful for in terms of the state of journalism and media as we sort of are still navigating through these issues of truth and how to make sure we're getting there.
So I disagree with Kara's analysis of the book. I mean, she liked the book, so I'm grateful for that. But I disagree with it because I think ultimately the end message is a hopeful one, which is that the family all comes together and reconciles, and they love each other and they're proud of each other. And that is my experience in this world, is that no matter what's going on out there, I've got this great family unit that, like Charlie Martyr, includes a strong wife and a daughter and a son. And I'm very happy for that. And it's the most important thing to me. In terms of what I'm hopeful for when it comes to the Great American Experiment, we continue to persevere. We continue to achieve. We continue to survive. I don't know that we're thriving right now. We're surviving right now. But I don't know of another country that's doing it better. I just don't. I mean, at the end of the day, I know there are, there's legitimately a debate in the world about autocracy versus democracy. And without question, autocracy is easier, but it also is oppressive and, not even a debate, really. Yeah. And if somebody wants to point to a country that believes in democratic values, that believes in small r Republican values, that's doing it better than the United States, I'd like to hear who they are. I mean, I guess you could make an argument about Canada, but I don't know. It's not easy, this stuff, and I've said this before, it's the American experiment. It's not the American proven achievement. We're still seeing it if it works, but that means that we're going to be prodded and poked. And it's still better today than it was 20 years ago better than 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50. It just still is. Even if you think, democracy is at greater risk today because of all these anti-democratic forces and the lies about the election and this and that. Okay, I don't disagree with that. But we have more people who are experiencing their full potential in the United States right now than 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. We have more people willing and able to live as they want to live their lives than 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so, no one said it's going to be easy. I am hopeful. And if not, there's always New Zealand, You
got your place? Have you bought your visa?
No, I think Canada's much closer. Let's be honest. I'm joking. I have faith.
The first to go. We're going to annex Canada like this.
I have faith in the United States. I do. I think Winston Churchill said you can always trust in the American people to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possible option.
I think that remains true, and we see it all the time. But thank you so much for making the time. I know it's rather late where you are, so we appreciate you staying up with us here on the West Coast. Thank you to Jake Tapper, author of All the Demons Are Here. We encourage everyone to pick up a copy of this new book at your local bookstore. If you'd like to watch more programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in making virtual and in-person programming possible, please visit commonwealthclub.org/events. I'm Melissa Kane. Thank you, and see you next time.
Great job, Melissa. Thank you.